3,200. That's how many new trade restrictions countries imposed in a single year. Just a few years earlier, that number was closer to 1,100. That is a massive shift in how the global economy works. And when trade rules start changing that quickly, companies can't rely on stable supply chains anymore. So they start redesigning how they operate. Factories automate faster, companies adopt AI tools to control cost, and entire industries start reorganizing. In other words, geopolitical tension doesn't just affect diplomacy, it accelerates technological change. Today, I want to explain why rising global instability, from tariffs to war to oil shocks to stagflation risk, is pushing companies faster into automation and AI. I'm Dr. April Barrage. I'm a labor economist, and I study how economic shocks reshape labor markets and the future of work. My argument is simple. When energy, trade, and financing become unstable, companies respond by automating faster. The world isn't just volatile. The incentive structure is changing, and AI and automation are becoming the default coping strategy. Why this seems counterintuitive is because there's common intuition is that risky times, many companies freeze, and sometimes they do. Projects get delayed, hiring slows, but when companies feel squeezed, another instinct shows up. Control what you can control. In economics, this is a substitution story. When an input becomes more expensive or less reliable, energy, imported components, financing, firms substitute toward whatever delivers the same output with less exposure. And increasingly, that substitute is software, robotics, and AI. Automation used to be about long-term productivity. Now it's increasingly about survival under pressure. Let me show you how this works through 3 shock channels. The first one is energy. Energy shocks raise the value of efficiency almost overnight. Energy is embedded in everything: transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, data centers. Where energy prices jump, the same factory, the same shipping route, the same staffing model suddenly has to do more with less. That's when efficiency technologies move from nice to have to essential. Number 2, trade shocks raise the value of resilience. Tariffs and trade policy uncertainty make supply chains less predictable. Firms respond by rerouting suppliers, holding more inventory, or considering reshoring production. But reshoring is expensive, especially because labor tends to cost more domestically. Automation becomes a lever that makes the domestic production financially possible. And the third one is the stagflation risk, which changes what counts as a good investment. Stagflation is a nightmare combination. Rising costs and slower economic growth. Even the risk of it pushes companies to prioritize investments that reduce waste, deliver faster payback, and allow them to adjust quickly if conditions change. That makes productivity technologies like the automation and AI way more attractive. Is this really happening? Yes, and we can see it clearly. In the International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook update, countries imposed about 3,200 new trade restrictions in 2022 and about 3,000 in 23. That's up from roughly 1,100 from 2019. That kind of policy whiplash pushes companies to rethink supply chains. Research from the San Francisco Fed finds that when trade policy uncertainty rises, firms in trade-exposed industries are more likely to reshore production and automate tasks, including increasing their use of industrial robots. So trade friction doesn't just change where factories go, it changes how those factories operate. We can also see this shift in how businesses talk about their decisions. In the Federal Reserve Beige Book Summary for early 2026, firms across several regions reported rising non-labor costs and described turning to AI and automation to gain efficiency. The emphasis wasn't simply replacing workers, it was improving productivity under cost pressure. In other words, AI adoption isn't only driven by technological excitement, it's also driven by the economic pressure that we are all experiencing. Adoption is accelerating. Using the U.S. Census Bureau Business Trends and Outlook survey, researchers estimate that AI use by firms rose from 3.7% to 5.4% between late 23 and early 2024. Firms expected adoption to reach roughly 6.6 by the end of 2024. For a general purpose technology, that represents a rapid diffusion curve. So when we look at this energy AI paradox, which is something else, it illustrates how this mechanism works in practice. Google's DeepMind built a machine learning system that reduced the energy used for cooling Google's data centers by roughly 40%. Energy efficiency used to be a long-term optimization project. But in a world of volatile energy prices and tighter margins, it's actually becoming a competitive advantage. But here's the twist. AI doesn't just respond to energy pressure. It also creates energy pressure. The International Energy Agency projects that electricity demand from data centers could more than double by 2030, driven largely by AI. In other words, we're entering a feedback loop. Energy volatility pushes firms toward efficiencies, yet technologies, while the expansion of AI increases demand for energy. It's a contradiction, and it's going to be the defining economic contradiction of the next decade. Once you understand that mechanism, the broader economic consequences become easier to see. Let me walk you through 4 of them. One consequence is the rise of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship isn't the main story here, but it's one symptom of economic experimentation. When the world feels unstable, people search for income they can control, and digital tools, especially AI, have dramatically lowered the cost of starting businesses. In the United States, business applications remain historically high, with roughly 5.6 million applications filed in 2025 alone. That's millions of people experimenting with new ways to earn income. Another consequence is faster task automation. The International Monetary Fund estimates that about 40% of global employment is exposed to AI. In advanced economies like the US, that number rises to roughly 60%. Exposure doesn't mean immediate job loss, but it does mean that many job tasks are now candidates for redesign. And under cost pressure, that redesign tends to happen more quickly. Economic instability also influences how people think about money and financial systems. The US dollar right now remains the dominant global reserve currency, but fragmentation and payment frictions have increased interest in alternatives. Some households experiment with cryptocurrencies, others are drawn to faster digital payments like stablecoins. The IMF notes that stablecoin issuance has roughly doubled over the past 2 years. In many cases, the appeal isn't replacing the dollar entirely, it's improving the speed and flexibility of the current payment systems. Finally, economic volatility is contributing to the rise of what I call the multiple income stream era. When uncertainty increases, people diversify income the way investors diversify portfolios. In early 2026, roughly 5% of U.S. workers held more than one job. That represents millions of people building financial resilience through additional income sources. For many workers, relying on a single employer no longer feels sufficient protection against economic uncertainty. So the broader takeaway is this: economic shocks don't only slow the economy down, they can also accelerate structural change because they alter incentives. When energy prices fluctuate, trade becomes uncertain, and margins are under pressure, companies rarely wait for conditions to stabilize. Instead, they automate, they digitize, and they adopt technologies like AI to produce more output with fewer vulnerabilities. So for workers, what does this mean for you? This transformation has 2 important implications. First, the most stable roles are often the ones that complement AI, and I'm telling you, I cannot stress this enough. These aren't simply technical jobs, they're roles that require judgment, trust, negotiation, problem solving, and deep domain expertise. The second is to involve developing multiple skill sets, building professional networks, pursuing additional credentials, starting side projects, or simply preparing for the possibility that your role. So here's the question I'll leave you with. In the future, what will stability look like? Working for a single employer for decades, or will it mean building a portfolio of skills and income streams that can adapt as the economy evolves? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And if you want more analysis on how current events and global shifts are reshaping the labor markets and the economy from an actual labor economist, that's exactly what we talk about on this channel. Feel free to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.